Welcome to episode 5 of the Discovery Files. Scott Briscoe, myself, and Ahmad Salim are interviewing Julian Woodcock for the Invincible discovery in Australia, and also just about his experience in general, about what it was like during that time. So, Julian, if you want to do an intro of yourself, go ahead.
Oh, thanks very much. Great to be here. Yeah, Julian Woodcock. I'm a career geologist. I actually describe myself as an accidental geologist, but that's a different story maybe for another day, how I ended up in the geology sphere. But yeah, from the UK, graduated in the early 2000s, spent a decade or so working in Central Asia and Russia, which was extremely interesting. It probably got relevance to this topic and discussion about people and how you manage things and how it shaped me as an individual. And then was privileged enough to be invited by Goldfields, who I was working for in Central Asia, to come and head up exploration at St Ives Gold Mine in early 2011, and spent a number of years there, and then jumped ship to Evolution Mining for a few years, also in that part of the world, in Western Australia. Then a few years with Gold Road Resources, working around the Gruyere project in Yamana, and then spent the last 4.5 years as the MD of a junior explorer, which is a very different environment to the larger companies and the larger teams that I've been managing to work with previously. So that's my career in a snapshot.
And so, because you opened the Pandora's box, why are you an accidental geologist? You stepped into that one yourself, so you can't blame me for that.
Look, I mean, I call myself an accidental geologist because I didn't really know anything about geology at school. I didn't get through high school thinking I'm burning desire, I want to be a geologist and resources. Didn't know anything about it. And I went to university to do civil engineering and really struggled with the maths. The maths was not my forte, much more complicated. I like the concept of being out on a site, getting my hands dirty, being involved with people. So that first year, I pretty much crashed and burned. And I made new friends at university who were doing geology, and it was straight geology, not mining or applied geology, just all the aspects of geology. And it looked perfect to me. Every few months, they were off on field trips to different parts of the UK or Europe, and it just looked like the great thing to be doing. So I changed, set into a geology degree, did my undergrad, and at the end of it, I thought, what do I do now? So I spoke to the university lecturers, and I had one camp pushing me to do a PhD, ironically, to get into a PhD into the maths side of stuff in geology. And then other side
Full
was
circle.
saying, yeah, and like it was all the statistics and that sort of stuff. I was like, no, because I seem to do well in the stats. And then another side of the university lecturers would say, well, you can go into the resource industry. Have you thought about that? And if you want to do that, we recommend you go do a master's degree in mining geology at the Campbell School of Mines. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to be locked into academia for my life. So I went and did my MSc in mining geology. And pretty much even before I'd finished that degree, the Campbell School of Mines had an association of lecturers that did consultancy work. And they had a gig in Uzbekistan for 8 weeks. So before I even finished my my master's, I tipped off to Uzbekistan for 8 weeks. And that was actually around September 11th, because I remember September 11th, I was in the basement of the state geology building in Samarkand, fielding through old Russian sections and plans of a VMS deposit while nursing what can only be said as a very tender stomach after living in a part of the world I've never been to. And that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. So, yeah, I accidentally fell into geology, and I nearly fell out of it because gold was poor at the time. Went back to the UK, couldn't get a job anywhere really. I ended up in coal mining for a couple of years, and I was probably at the end of my rope in terms of there wasn't a lot of career opportunities and things. So I was almost going to leave the industry, but then the guys in Uzbekistan came and knocked on my door again because the gold price had turned and they were building the mill that I was looking at the concept of when I went there. And yeah,
Yeah,
since
yeah.
then it hasn't looked back, and I've traveled the world and ended up living in Australia.
Just gonna say, like, how did Goldfields kind of come about? Because you obviously landed here in Australia through
Yeah.
Goldfields, or did you come here for another company?
No, that was again. This my career is probably significantly shaped by opportunities, which also feeds into the whole topic of this conversation about people. In the sense that usually I find in geology, you find your way through your career through your connections more so than for applying for things. And I've had a couple of roles that I've applied for, but I ended up with Goldfields through one of those types of connections. So I'd been, well, I'll take one further step back because there's another pre-connection. So I was working in Far Eastern Russia at the Kupol deposit. I got that job on the back of the knowledge I'd gained working in Central Asia and the Russian kind of thing, speaking a bit of Russian. It was a really hard gig on the family. It was 6 weeks on, 4 weeks off, lots of travel, Arctic setting. So I looked for something else. And interestingly, I actually applied for and went for a role at Sakari in Egypt. And I did get offered that job. But at the same time, the person I'd worked with at the Cameron School of Mine Associates way back at the start of my career was now involved in a junior listed company in the UK. And they reached out to say, would I be interested? And so I went, had an interview. It was about going exploring a porphyry copper project in Kyrgyzstan. So in the end, that's the role I took. It was more family friendly, moved to Kyrgyzstan. And Goldfields were joint venturing into that asset. So they were basically funding the exploration. And at a tipping point, their exploration spend reached a certain point. They took management control. And at that point, they said, well, we want you to come with the project. So I ended up moving on to Goldfields' books. We explored that for a few years. And essentially, the political risk and the sovereign risk became too high. Goldfields looked to exit. And that coincided with the exploration manager job at St. Ives becoming available internally within Goldfields. And I got put forwards as a suitable candidate for that. I was just told, here, would you like to go and do this? So I hopped on a plane, did a 2-day visit. So I'd spent more hours in the air flying than I did on site. Met Malcolm, who's the mineral resources manager there. And yeah, after all of that, they said, yep, we'll move you. So they relocated.
Yeah, wow.
So again, I'm an accidental immigrant of Australia as well, because it was never my plan to emigrate from the UK and immigrate into Australia. And that's what happened now 14 plus years ago.
But we talked about this with Aisha as well, as how many little things like this had to fall into place that could have totally changed the path of this discovery, right? Because if you'd been replaced with or not replaced, but someone else that was more conservative had gotten this job, how easy is it to kibosh things and say, no, we're not going to drill there. No, we're not going to do this. And so the accidental nature of some of these successes is kind of shocking to me sometimes.
I think that's a really, really valid point. And I will quite happily say you can't underplay my lack of knowledge of the Goldfields and the geology and the paradigms that were in place before I came had a part of that, because traditionally the area we went exploring in was a less favored terrain. It was all the gold's hosted in the dolerites and the mafics. It's not that gold wasn't found in these other areas, but the big deposits were always in these rocks and etc. And I rock up, and I think that was one of our biggest exploration budget years, if I remember, in 2011 or 2012. We had like a $40 million total exploration budget for greenfields and brownfields and site. It was huge. And it was almost an impossible task to keep enough targets operating and the rigs turning. So that a big part of my job was putting trust in the people with the skills, which in all honesty, I'll put my hands up. Most of the team there had the knowledge and had the skills, which I didn't have. So I didn't come in being the all-knowing individual of the science and the chemistry and the rocks and the geology. It was really a strong management role about just getting shit done. It was about having the pieces in place and the equipment there and the availability of resources to be able to keep the conveyor belt going to test targets. And we had like 11, 12 rigs spinning all year. Easy, and that was a mixture of 2 to 3 aircore rigs, 3 or 4 RC rigs, and 2 to 3 diamond rigs or something like that. And we split that across a portion of early stage project development, and a second part was resource drilling, essentially to get resources defined from discoveries. And yeah, we just set about doing that work. And I look back at it, I don't actually know. Yeah, I certainly got dropped in the deep end. I didn't have that kind of experience. What I did bring from my international experience, because I think it's a very valuable exposure for people to get who work in developed countries, actually to spend a stint in a developing country, because the work requirements are totally different. It's much more logistical based. It's like, where can I find an actual drill rig? Where can I find an actual geologist? It's not about, well, it plays a key part, the science and the geology and the targeting and all that good work, but a huge part of it is just logistics. I mean, I spent a year in Kyrgyzstan actually just trying to get the rig back on the ground, because there'd been a revolution in the country. There'd been essentially people at the local community and country, a group were opposed to us doing work, so they stopped us doing our work, and we had to spend a solid year doing community and stakeholder engagement just to get our social license to operate and get back out on the ground. So we were having camps for the local kids and building. We'd do a 1-week summer camp for them, and we'd have them stay at our site, and we were building, I don't know, trebuchets out of pieces of wood and doing crate climbs, and we were teaching them skills though about the science and the geology and the stewardship we do. So we take them up on the hill, because a big concern locally was water. So we got the kids doing little cross sections through streams to measure the areas, and then we throw ping pong balls in and measure the flow. This was something I did at school when I was 10 years old or something, but we got the kids engaged so they could say, right, now you can work out how much water is coming out. And then we'd adjunct that with, and when we do our exploration, this is how much water we use. And then they could see that, well, we're not using this much compared to what is actually flowing through.
Yeah.
We had an aspect of that from our business, but yeah, I've kind of sidewinded off to something else there. But
it's an interesting point, right? Like the so much, actually, I think that's actually facing us in the developed countries now, is people have no idea how much water a mine uses versus how much water a golf course wastes, right? And so we always, like, hear about how terrible, mining is for the environment and things. And I think sometimes that's what it takes to show people is very real world, very local examples. And so it's almost like we've failed in the developed nations of doing the same thing, right?
yeah, I think you're right. Just educating people in the resources sector of what we do, how we do it. I'm a firm believer that farming creates much more environmental damage than mining in general. I do accept that there's some huge coal mines and iron ore mines, and you've got a secondary aspect. The emissions from coal and fossil fuels is certainly very, very damaging. But yes, in the context of, if you add the surface disturbance of open pit mines together around the world and you compare it to, say, car parks and roads, there's a big difference, right? There's a big
Yeah, I remember like hearing this stat a long time ago, just as an aside, that there's more real estate used for pubs in Australia than there is mines, right? And so if you think about that, like, you realize that, like, yeah, this, like, I mean, obviously mining, like, absolutely, like, annihilates a point source, but, like, the impact of other things, other development, community development is far greater than what we actually like do to the planet. It's just that we've had some colossal stuff ups in the past, which like color the social conscience a certain way.
So, Julian, it's kind of interesting thinking about how much your logistical experience prepared you for this role, because I know for me personally, I haven't had anything that's been the logistical challenge of St. Ives since I left St. Ives, right? It's, moving rigs around and having, like, making sure that there's no delays and things. So what was, yeah, I guess, what other things kind of influenced you on how you end up running that project?
That's a good question. I probably need to dig in something will light up, but I think first it was, as I said, just I have in my nature, in my individual personality and makeup, I like to deliver on plans. So it was about, okay, here's the goal, here's the objective, this is what we need to achieve. So that always gives me the personal drive. It was about bringing the resources together, which I've talked about. It was
What were your first impressions, like, when you got to St. Ives? Like, what were your first impressions of the group or the company, the way it was run? Is there something that stands out from that period?
it was I probably had no comprehension of it before I arrived there. Just the history, the quality of the science, the privilege, and I do call it a privilege, that the team actually had to be able to focus so much on the geology. As I said, in my experience prior to that, the geology has always been the purpose of the activity, but a large portion was always taken up about just getting the work done to be able to get the data to do the geology.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that the team generally had a lot of resources available to them. So it was extremely impressive. The systems that had built up, so coming from the WMC days that had been adopted by Goldfields in order to be able to maintain that level of activity. So that was extremely impressive. I was humbled by the knowledge base in the team. And yeah, I think as I said, into the context of this conversation about people, I think it's really critical that a manager of a team understands that they're just a piece. They're just like the conductor of an orchestra. They can't play all the instruments. There's no way they can do that. But what they need to do is make sure that the right instruments are playing at the right time to be able to make the tune appear. And that really was my job. And there was many people there that are significantly higher skilled. And I've taken that experience through to the rest of my career. I mean, I run a junior now. We have little to no employees full time. So what we do is the way we explore and the way we operate is we rely on specialists and consultants in their field to provide us the information as and when we need it, and then we bring those pieces together to conduct our exploration. So that would be a key aspect.
So how much were you involved in actually hiring the team at St. Ives when you got there? Were you involved in? Were you given the team, or were you allowed to mold it?
I hired Scott. That was one.
Yeah, I mean, we all make mistakes. Yeah, we all make mistakes. So yeah, we have to live with them, but that's okay.
One of the key things done quite early on when I did make my mark early on. I did have a bit of a reorg, both in terms of the organizational chart of the people and the teams. That didn't mean letting people go, but it meant structuring it in a way that I felt we could achieve the objective to be able to maintain the amount of activity we had to do. And it all boiled down to number of targets tested per year. We literally went to a statistical basis of if we test 40 or so targets a year at different levels of the pipeline, we'd get enough to push through that would ultimately yield a discovery.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
So we said, well, if we need to drill, I can't remember if it was 40 or 8, might have been 80 targets a year.
I think it was 80 was the goal.
I think 80 was the targets, and we broke that down into, I don't know, early stage, whatever. And then we had a spreadsheet that organized rigs and people. So we developed an organization chart of people to be able to manage that. And then we set about providing the infrastructure to be able to manage that. So we had a bit of a shuffle around of office space and people and the courtyard and just how we went about business. The field support team was a critical aspect. So yeah, it was they were key things that we needed to do in order to establish it. So I found it sort of like making a nest in a way. When you turn up, you're getting things comfortable where you are, and then you know how you can operate with that and carry it forward.
How long do you think it took you to plan that reorg and execute it?
I don't think it was a conscious decision when I arrived, like I'm going to turn up and I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'm a very much fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. I'm a reactive individual. I'm much to my wife's behests. We go away on holiday. I'll pack my bag the night before. She's got a suitcase out 3 weeks before and is slowly packing it. I'll do it at the time, and I kind of need that pressure pot to be able to do it. So to answer your question, how long it took? Well, we probably in my tenure there did a couple of reorgs. Some of them were initially on the basis of I was setting things up the way I thought it would work. Others were driven by change in the economic climate and a requirement to reduce the workforce. So I was not so keen on those ones. I think 6 months. I mean, look, I can't remember exactly. I think I moved to St. Ives in May 2011, and I think we discovered Invincible in early 2012 from memory. So
yeah, I think it was December,
April?
January, something like that. And then, because I think I left around Thanksgiving, so it would have been like, right, yeah. So it was right around then, like turn of the year, because I think I got to St. Ives in October, and I remember I was like logging Aircore on what became Invincible hopelessly lost in mud and salt and things like that. So that would have been the very first stage before the diamond, and then that you talk about that what an incredible turnaround to go from air core to diamond in like a month, and then to hit the first intercepts. You know?
And that was that. To be honest, I mean, it's probably a once in a lifetime experience. I hope there's more of them, but
Yeah, me too.
yeah. And again, that was just forced out of necessity. The environment we were working in, the only kind of rigs we had available other than Lake Aircore were Lake Diamond, so we went straight to Diamond. And we drilled, I think, 7 holes, and something like 5 of them hit ore grade intersections over a kilometer of strike. So it was pretty phenomenal. And then yeah, we hit it hard after that.
So I was thinking about how you're getting results coming in, because I remember like we drilled like incredible, like there's drilling all over the board, right? We had like the whole map covered by rigs at one point, and so you're getting all these results, and like, do you remember the first results coming in from Invincible or?
I remember sitting down in our meeting room we had there with a long section or a plan of the diamond results with Tommy McKeith and Ed Baltis. And I thought they were good results, but yeah, I certainly recognized the validity of them. But I had a lack of familiarity with the style of how a deposit represented itself there. I'd come from a porphyry copper project where we got, I don't know, 150 meters at 0.2% copper and 0.5%, 0.5 grams per ton gold. And we were getting, I don't know, 8-10 meters at 4 or 5 gram gold, probably more. And that's probably when it really struck me, because Ed Baltis was extremely excited by it. And he was like, "You really got something. We're really onto something here." And so, yeah, I was quite reserved at the time. I was like, well, let's just keep going. Yeah, let's get out there and get it done. So I remember that. I don't necessarily remember like someone running into my office with an assay sheet, sort of go, "Look what we got." I don't probably quite remember that. Again, I was still very much within my first year of the role and kind of swamped with every day. My desk had a pile of drill proposals on it that was usually 6 inches high. And then I would have to find time to read, because I had to sign them all off. And yeah, so I was reading a lot of these at the time.
I remember us trying to find ways to like game the system to get ours noticed more. And it's like, what's he looking for in this? So,
I'd like to think I was quite liberal and would let anyone test pretty much anything that was a good a target that they could explain, like whether it was conceptual or database. Because we had stuff that was purely conceptual. This is a location. I mean, there'd be a bit of geophysics or something, but there wouldn't necessarily be any air core or sampling. But yeah, if someone could tell a good story and say what they're looking for and how they're going to do it, the key thing was size. It had to have capability to grow into something substantial. And for St. Ives, it needed to be north of sort of 250,000 ounces. But yeah, I felt I would certainly sign a lot more to prove to be drilled than weren't to drill.
yeah, no, it was
I
actually
think that
something we talked about with Aisha. Was I remember at the time, like, it felt very demanding to have, like, because I'd never worked anywhere that had such a formalized process of, like, document these things and document what the target concept is, and show you have to have geophysical maps and you have to have all these things. And in hindsight, I've looked at that, and I've insisted on the same since then, because it goes back to what you said was, you wanted to know that people had a real concept and they weren't throwing a bunch of bullshit out there and saying, "Oh, just, like waste drill holes," right? And so, in hindsight, I've gone like, "Man, I didn't realize how valuable that is," both for us on, my side of things at that point, and the other people in the team, because you then had to formalize your ideas, right? So you had to define what the target concept was, and not just have a blob on a map, but you had to say, we think it's a structure with a 75-degree dip, like striking like this, and here's the units we're expecting, and here's that. And I look back and at that now, and I go, what a valuable exercise, because I remember as we were doing that, many times we would change our drill plans, because we would go, well, if it's really a structure like that, I guess I'm not drilling it very well. Maybe I should have some holes oriented like this as well. And so it's kind of funny, in hindsight. I remember just being like, oh yeah, this is, this, it felt like paperwork. And then now I go, oh, what a, I don't know. I often regret my own immaturity at times in my career.
Oh, there's two key aspects I think to that, Scott. First and foremost, you need a hypothesis, right? That's science. And all we're asking with that document is to explain your hypothesis, and then define your method to evaluate and test the hypothesis and what your outcome will be. So we're just setting up a lab experiment in the real world with big equipment to test it. So that's the first step. The second part is, and this is probably what wasn't realized by most, and I probably didn't realize it at the time. I was just putting tools in place to get me comfortable with the overall responsibility for a large budget and a large team with a critical objective of finding gold to keeping a mine alive. I needed sufficient information to allow me to do it. And the most efficient way for me was to have someone put it down on paper, let me read through it. And then I think countless times I would take that and go and sit with an individual and say, talk me through it. Like, I've read it, I understand your concept, but now just show me it on the screen or show me on your map. And I'm not sure, Scott, if you were still there or whether it was after you left, but do you remember Sam Eakins?
No, it must have been after I
Yeah,
left.
so Sam came after you left. He probably actually filled the gap that you left, I think. He used to work at Tenors and he came back. He worked there before my time, and then he came in. He's very successful and great geologist, and he joined me at Evolution. But he was senior geo in the project generation team, and he took it a step further, and we actually made it even more simple. He developed this thing called storyboards, we ended up naming it. And it was basically an A0 sheet. And it started off by just taking an A0 sheet, and someone would print out their mag map and their air core results or their geochem anomaly map, and they just stick it on like an A4 piece. And then you'd have a section where you doodle and do things, and it would become a storyboard, and you could stand around it and just go, well, look, I've got my mag data here, and I've got my geochem data here, and this is my concept, and here's like a schematic out of a structural geology journal showing the kind of setting that you got, and that would be your storyboard. So we moved from needing such written document type things to more visual representation, and then it went from being a piece of stuck down pieces of paper through to like a bit of a more formal Microsoft Publisher template that then you'd just put them in digitally and then just print it on the plotter. And yeah, we took that from there. And when I went to Evolution, we insisted on doing, and the same sort of things happened. Each year we'd have to do a budget, we'd have to go through a process, and so yeah, well, we think we're going to go for this much, so we need to get our best 25, 35 targets. This is what we'll test, and we'd have to present that to the leadership team, essentially the head of geology, for our budget. So that was grown out of necessity. It was amorphous, and you just do what you need to do. And yeah, on reflection, it was a journey. So people, because we're talking about people have developed things, and then you take the good bits and you mold them and you advance them and you utilize them.
Julian, do you think like having this kind of like, I don't want to say formalized process, but like this process of identifying what targets you should kind of do you think that helped you being in a new role in a new organization? Because you could, like I assume you didn't have the level of trust that you needed with management, right? Like you had just landed, so you've landed, and they're asking you to drill 80 targets a year or whatever the number was, right? And so so having a process where you could go say, actually, these are the best targets we have because the guys have kind of put the time into putting the hypothesis, the method, all of those things on page. Do you think that helped you along the way?
It was critical, and a secondary aspect of that, it's a bit of cover your ass. You're in a seat driving, and you're responsible for a very large budget. And as I said, personally, I've always been driven to want to succeed, to want to deliver. And if I was speaking with a psychologist, they'd probably take that back to being a young boy and wanting to impress my dad or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, having a process in place. Those processes did exist. Whether they were put in place for the purpose I utilized them is a different question. But I got what I needed out of them to be confident that we were doing the best we could. Because it's really easy in that setting with that number of rigs to just because most of my I had one manager above me who was a geologist, but otherwise on the site, pretty much all the other leadership team were engineers and process guys. And if we're honest about it in this forum, most of them haven't got a clue about geology or deposits. Um, they what it meant, yeah, you can easily fall into the trap of, well, I'm just keeping the rigs busy. They're always out there, they're always working, and that was one of our KPIs, was to keep the rigs operational, to get the meters drilled. But you have to avoid falling into the trap of, I'm just drilling a hole. You're not going to discover anything. You mean you might get lucky and hit some holes in the right place, but you've got to improve your odds, and improving your odds with good science. So
One thing I was going to say is like, the thing that you talked about, the drill proposal thing, that seemed like a very WMC thing because, like I suffered through that as well when I was in, where you were asked to kind of, like essentially tell your storyboard or your idea in a format that could be digested by not just your peers, but also your management and upper management as well, right? Like they could go and say, these guys aren't going to go and just punch 10 holes because they, like they like that area. They actually have a conceivable idea. And the one thing that like I guess I've found out of programs where we just drilled holes for the sake of drilling holes, just because it fit our KPI of how many meters we needed to drill, as opposed to going through a group where you have to fight for the meters that you want to drill and you have to explain them and do all of that, is one of the things that I found, and I'd be curious on your opinion on this, is one of the things I found about the approach that you guys used is that you get more drill holes to test your idea. So you often don't, you often don't shank a project just because you've drilled a couple of dead holes. Like if you've said that, you're going to need somewhere between like say 8 to 10 drill holes to test an idea, like until the idea is tested, because you've kind of put it on paper, the management often asks you, well, have you tested the idea with 5 drill holes? And if you say no, they go, well, like you still have another 5 to test the idea. And I think that's kind of sometimes important about testing new things, like which Invincible was, right? Because it's otherwise, I think, a little bit easier to go, well, we've had a couple of dusters, so let's just, like yank the project and move the rig somewhere else. Do you think that's the case as well?
yeah, I always, it's almost a cardinal rule, subscribe to, you have to design a program to test your concept or your target. You don't go to a program saying, well, I've got 5 holes to test this program. I always say to people, just design something that does what you want to do, and then we'll work back from there. We'll go, well, this one might be unrequired because if these aren't come good, if that hits it but these don't, it's not going to make a difference. It's, I don't know, it's only going to be too small, or these sorts of things. So I always ask people to put together a program that's sufficient to test the target. The second aspect is you have another couple of measures that I always look to apply, which was exploration success and exploration effectiveness. So exploration success is advancing. So you're testing an anomaly, you get good results, it moves up. I've now defined an anomaly, I'm going to do another drill program. Exploration effectiveness is you've done enough work to be able to confidently walk away and say it's either advanced or it's dead. So if you can't achieve those two things, and I think that's a fair way of assessing people and teams in terms of their performance, is geology is notoriously, and resource geology, notoriously hard. The success rates are very low. We have to accommodate and expect failure at a high level. It's not always the geologist's fault. Well, it never is the geologist's fault that the gold isn't there. But we need to.
That's all predefined, right?
Yeah,
like we can only find what's there.
But if we measure on those two aspects, exploration effectiveness and exploration success, a team can be extremely effective at testing all the targets. They just don't get success. If you measure solely on success, you're in terms of advancing a target and resulting in a discovery, I don't think you're being fair to a lot of teams that work very hard. You've got to be effective, and then with a product of effectiveness, good geology, good systems, good processes, you should achieve success.
One of the questions I was going to ask you is, in hindsight, looking at other programs I've managed, I was just thinking about the workload of what you faced as like exploration manager on this project, where you managed three different teams. So it was like, I think it was three, right? So there it was, maybe it was four. So it was, like the Project Gen, and then it was the next, phase. They went from inferred to, was it indicated? I can't remember
Yeah, so well, there were two main teams. So there was, and I forgot the names. They had extensional and additional exploration were the names that were
Yeah.
used at
Yeah.
site. It's a bit odd couple of names, but essentially additional explorations project generation, and then extensional was basically defining a resource up to a point where it could have a mine design done on it, and then it would get handed over to the mining team, and they would do probably infill resource definition as well as grade control. So my
So
I was all up to a resource.
yeah. So I guess my question is, how did you stay effectively engaged as a geologist with all of that going on? Because it wasn't just Project Gen, which we talked about the 80 targets. It was, these people are drilling out this and these people are drilling out this. How did you, like, because you continued doing geology, right? You continued having those good geology conversations. How did you make time or find time?
Um, Probably didn't do as much geology. I'll tell you what, where I'm at in my career now, I'm doing more geology than I ever did, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'm planning drill hole. I'm down and dirty with the data, and that's just the necessity of a junior explorer. But um, I I guess again, through my career, had a whole load of different evaluations and sort of 360s and those sorts of things, and I've come to I think know myself fairly well. I'm not a really strong detail guy. I won't spend weeks and weeks and weeks researching and reading papers and building things up slowly. I kind of go in an approach that 80-20 principle. Gabe said a bit right, and don't worry too much about the other 20%. So it probably worked quite well to be able to have these things to read, but then sit with people, and that would give me my geology hit. I certainly enjoyed getting to the point where we'd get the resources done, and I would sit in a lot of debates, if you want to call it that. We had at the site, we also had the resource geology team. So the resource geology team were actually a team of dedicated resource estimation geologists we would in our teams provide the wireframes and the geological interpretation, but then we'd pass it to them to do the resource estimate. So they do all the stats, and we worked on the basis we'll get good geology models together, and we'll get a specialist to do the resource estimate. So, but what that resulted in is meetings with the resource geology team. A lot of them were about classification, what's inferred, what's not. And so, oh no, this can't be inferred. I mean, what do you mean it can't be inferred? We've got 4 drill holes over 300 meters of strike, and every one has hit a structure and it's got gold in it. I can infer that structure exists. It's not going to stop in between the two. I'm not saying we have to next round of drilling convert it to indicated, but it can still be more inferred. But we should be able to get inferred geology off 4 sections, right? And those sorts of discussions. I did end up having, or we had internally within the team that I was responsible for, some guys that could do resource estimates, and then we just would have to have peer reviews. So getting involved at that level, kind of getting involved, seeing what people were thinking, and then stepping back and then keep checking in. It's kind of like, I guess, when you're building a house, not that I've built a house, but when you're building a house, you keep doing your site visits and rocking up and checking with the builder, and you see the thing grow. You get to go away and come back and go, wow, look how it's changed. I had that kind of level of engagement and exposure. So I would see things happen, get involved in between doing performance reviews and safety visits and all the other management stuff that came along with my role.
So one thing I don't want to forget is, and so like I'll just say it now so you can remind me later if I do forget. But you'd made a decision fairly early on to involve a lot of these different departments in this, because I think you recognized that it was going to become a discovery and turn into a mine. So don't let me forget that. But the where I want to get before then is a little bit more chronological. So phase 1's drilled, and I actually didn't know that part about Ed Baltus and is it Tommy McKeith? Yeah, I didn't know that part. But so like, what did phase 2 look like to you? Were you starting to get excited? Were you actually excited? Like, and then so just kind of walk us through that next phase of things.
Yeah, I was certainly excited. Again, I was probably, as I said before, probably a little bit ignorant to the magnitude of what we had hold of. And that probably in part came from Malcolm, who was my boss. as the mineral resource manager. He was very much again the type of individual under promise and over deliver. So there was always this lid coming down on us, like, no, well, let's just not get too far. I think he'd been burnt before. He'd been burnt, I think, with Athena or Hamlet or one of the other deposits that they'd done a resource and got it so big, and then they did a lot more work and they had to shrink it, and I think it left him in a difficult position. So
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
that'll sting for years.
Yeah, but so there was that aspect, but yeah, a lot of it was just let's get down and get on with how are we going to get it done. So we were 5Ks out into a salt lake. Fortunately, a good salt lake. It wasn't too soft, but we had this objective of, well, we need to move this thing forward. So we had to go about how do we go and do this, and actually I thoroughly enjoyed that, just the experience and the logistics of how to achieve it. I mean, at one point, I think I had a little bit of a joke or a dig at someone that, like, we're the only exploration team with our own mining fleet, because we were running 6 or 8 tipper trucks, a loader, and an excavator mining a waste dump in order to be able to build the roads to get out into the salt lake. And we were running this day in, day out, and we were building a lot of causeways. And then we had other problems, like we're digging this waste dump and we've got 2 benches down. It's like, well, if you go more than 2 benches, you need your own quarry manager's ticket. So, like, well, we can't keep digging this down. And then in the waste dump, there's lots of big bundings that you had to work around, and it was just a whole load of every turn was a different aspect, and that I found interesting, rewarding, exciting. I've got a great picture of, I think it's Aisha, with a loader on the causeway in the Salt Lake, and she's at the other end with Peg or something had walking towards the loader. It's like a really nice profile. And even now, like you go on Google Earth and stuff, and you look at the site, how much has changed. You've still got those arterial causeways that we built, but before then there was nothing there. So yeah, I was definitely excited about the progression. We added, I think, 250,000 ounces into resource the first year, and then I think we added another 1 million or 1.5 million ounces in the second year. That was about as much as I could push up to be accepted in terms of there was concerns
of the resource geos.
Yeah. But admittedly, though, we did all that work, and then we get to the engineers, and the reserve was, the underground reserve basically halved it. They left so much behind in stamps, in pillars and things, but I don't know where it sits now. But
it's the way of things.
Yeah.
I remember, like I talked about, like when Ahmad and I were discussing it, and I think it was episode 1, but like, I took a voluntary redundancy to leave, and my final thing, I remember leaving site, going up onto Red Hill and just looking out at the causeway being built and, you know, the drills out there and all that. But that must have been a really alien experience to you as well. I hadn't really thought about, like, I didn't realize you were there so relatively recently before me. So that must have been a pretty alien experience for you as well, to have this total production going on in the Salt Lake, right?
Oh, that and everything, to be honest. I mean, I'd come out of Kyrgyzstan where, as I said, we'd spent a year not exploring, developing our social license to operate, and doing absolutely very little geology, very little exploration work. It was all about just engaging with the community. So I was engaging with government a lot then as well, and other things. So yeah, it was a big change. It was extremely exciting. I'm extremely lucky and privileged to have been given the opportunity. I was just in the right place at the right time, and it's shaped me as an individual, an explorationist, a manager. It's given me skill sets. It's given me experiences. It's also made my eyes be open to what you can achieve. Like, you can pretty much achieve anything within reason. It just comes down to budget and resources. And if you've got a desire to achieve it, and you can pull together the budget and resources, you should be able to do it. I had similar experiences in Kyrgyzstan. We were exploring at some severely mountainous terrain, and we were having to drill and blast and cut our access ways in to get diamond drill pads in place. So we were doing similar things there, just in a very different environment.
So I was going to say, just to follow up on my earlier question, I guess Is that maybe like played part in you having more comfort with making that decision to start pouring resources into this, like involving environmental and permitting and all the other people. I was just thinking about like the nightmare it must have been to even get the permits to like from internally from the company to dig out a waste dump to go fill this causeway. So do you think, you know, segueing into that earlier question, do you think your previous experiences made you more comfortable making that decision? And then, like, what was that like? What was that decision like? Did you feel nervous about it?
I think a lot of it was not conscious and thinking so far ahead. As I said, I work in the short term. I pack the night before I go on holiday, so I saw the problem, saw the objective, and saw what we need to do. We need to get roads out to there. We've got a resource, we've got to do it. And when you start getting good results, that drives the backing. I certainly had. I mean, it wasn't all orchestrated by me. We had those resources on site, environmental engineering, safety, all those different aspects. And I've just always been comfortable utilizing resources. And I grew up in a family where if you don't ask, you don't get. So I'm a don't ask, you don't get person. So I'm more than happy to go up, but that doesn't mean I have an expectation on the individual to say yes. Unfortunately, I have learned there are other types of people that feel compelled to say yes, even if they don't want to. So when you bring me with one of those, they get a bit railroaded, and that's probably an aspect of my management style that has created in confrontations with other people just because they feel obliged. But I've learned to say to people, look, can we do this extra? Then look, I understand if we can't. I follow it with that, so it softens it for people to go. It's not an expectation. But yeah, so having all those different resources available at a large mine site made it easier. Yeah, that was a critical aspect.
We decided to split this interview into two parts. Hopefully, we've done it in a way that's cohesive and makes sense to most of our listeners. So, if you enjoyed the first half of this interview, please join us for the second.
Digging deep where the stories hide, through the hills and the mountains wide. Pickaxe swing and the earth unfolds, chasing dreams in the dirt and gold. Geology calling under our feet, secrets are buried in the rock and heat. With a heart full of wonder and a map in hand, exploring the treasures of this great land.